studies. I'm just an internal student and the partner of a full professor here. And the Academic Integrity Legal Fund had to be formed when, in response to being notified by a small American community-based NGO, Right to Know, which is very concerned about collusion between universities and corporations, especially Monsanto, we were informed that there had been a conference here with prominent people working for Monsanto indirectly and some academics. We looked for the transcript of that conference, initially with some funding from some help from Right to Know. We're talking about hundreds of dollars. And when the transcript finally came along after many months, that's what it looked like, 85% redacted. We then went through a process with the Freedom of Information Commissioner, financed by our money. We're talking about closer to $1,000 or so, where he went through and decided the large majority of these redactions were not justified. Unfortunately, the weakness of Saskatchewan right to know information legislation is such that we had to go to court using our own funding again, and we're talking about mainly concerned professors and ex-professors and faculty members, and a small amount from U.S. Right to Know. The reason I talk about this is because this is repeatedly mischaracterized badly in Trump-like tweets from Stuart Smith, the professor of agriculture, who in part, as we mentioned here, likens people opposing Monsanto to big tobacco. It's a rather bizarre inversion. And so the process is going on. In this petition, we are trying to tell or ask the Chancellor of the University to look into the way taxpayer money, student fees, the public resources of the university are being misspent to do everything possible. The university has been as obstructive as possible to prevent the public from knowing what happened at this conference. It was one of a series of things that happened right after the World Health Organization came out with the findings of carcinogenic links and Monsanto's main product. So, and there are many documents now, the Monsanto papers, that show this was an orchestrated campaign designed to misinform, minimize, and distort the findings. The university should be working for the public, and most especially the protection of the public and public health, not to hide such collusion.
Role is largely a kind of ceremonial one. Now he brings a lot of knowledge and prominence in the province, and there's the regulations and expectations, and the primary complication here is that this has had to go a legal route. It has had to go to the Court of Queen's Bench, but it should never have landed up there in the first place, because once you go into submissions in a judicial process, once you do that, then there are rules to be followed. The parties can't speak about this findings before the courts. So there's a kind of the irony is you want a particular silence to be broken, but when you're forced to go to court, and the first thing that happens there is the reimposition of that silence, so that the notion of the right to know is punted down the road because you've had to resort to a particular course of action. So if you look at the sequence, I think it's really interesting for members of the general public who have concerns with any kind of institution and the interface between the little guy and the behemoth kind of thing, because you.
Is it okay to record this?
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's an illustration of the very important provisions of freedom of information That is that, what would the media do without these applications? That it's a way in which you give yourself a good evidentiary base, what's really happening, in order to assess whether you need to take any more course of action or not. And so in this particular case, the Freedom of Information request, the university did comply with this, but they gave a transcription of this particular meeting, which was 85% redacted. So that you're complying, but you're not complying. What we did was to take that to the Information Privacy Commissioner, who reviewed the materials and said most of the university's redactions were entirely unnecessary, entirely unreasonable, particularly for a publicly funded institution. And when the event in particular that we wanted access to was called Managing Research and the Right to Know. Well, if the public doesn't have the right to know about how its dollars are being spent and how the reputation of the university is being used to legitimate particular kinds of things, then something is terribly wrong. So there was a very bad optics up front. That this is about the right to know, but you can't get into the meeting, you can't get access to the transcripts, even though it deals with serious policy matters that are in the news regularly. Have corporations too much clout? Are public institutions like universities so underfunded that they elasticate their conditions and the standards for donations because they're desperate for money to keep the research enterprise going? So there are lots of pressures here, but the best outcome would have been a reasonably redacted initial response from the university. So when through the commissioner, and this is problematic, I think, in a number of jurisdictions, including Saskatchewan, the office has no teeth, it has no clout. So therefore it is simply recommending to the party has been petitioned. And in that sense, I think, one of the things I think, and we've seen this in other cases, rural governance, Pine House, there's a lot of issues recently that suggest that the office is very important to the credibility of how money is spent, notions of accountability and so on. So the university has disregarded, agreed to disagree in terms of the redactions.
Did they do that formally?
Yes, they did that in an exchange, and so there's a paper trail on that indicates what the reasons were. The reasons were not particularly convincing, I think, and I raised this matter in University Council because the Council seemed to be a party to this particular process, and now it's being raised with Senate, and Senate is being asked to consider how this came about and whether the university's response is good. One question one might ask is this the first time the university has disregarded the recommendations of the commissioner and the reasons and his reasoning? I know it's not. They've done this before.
When was that?
I think it was 2 years ago. I'm not sure. You'd have to ask the university, and there may be things I don't know about. I do have another life, but in terms of this, is this a pattern of disregarding freedom from information requests or complying with them in ways that are singularly unhelpful because they're so full, they're still withholding the information that some people think they should have access to? So there's a real question here, and yet the university, inside the university, there are, it has its three particular cameras: the Board of Governors, Council, and Senate. Senate is the university's idea of the campus's window on the community and the community's window on the campus. If that window is broken, if that window is shuttered up, if that window functions as a one-way mirror, then the community and the volunteers who give their time, bring their expertise to an institution that matters to them, because it matters in part so much to the province, that they come, and they're not encouraged to engage critically, to fully inform themselves. They receive from the university a sort of biannual narrative. This is what we're doing. But the university not only keeps things, it also keeps things from the general public, from the community, and from their concerned representatives on the Senate. So here's a situation of problematic, I think it's the mistaking of confidentiality as license for a culture of concealment. Lots of things at the university are confidential. The privacy regulations, recruitment, promotions, all those sorts of things. But if the university is saying you can never have a candid conversation without concealing, without withholding attribution, don't even know who's at the meeting, don't know how they were invited, don't know what they said, and that's a position. Well, a university, I think, for the people of Saskatchewan, is a place that is aligned with disclosure and debate, not with concealment and denial of access.
So what specifically is the purpose of the petition? Like, what power does that have? Does it have any power, or is it more of a...
It's a moral urging. It's an ethical appeal to the Chancellor with all his credibility and the kinds of discretion he has and the position that he occupies as another voice to amplify our concerns and enhance the possibility, at least, that the university will change its mind, it will revisit its decision, it will remove much of the redaction without violating the conditions under which the meeting happened in the first instance.
Yeah, my name is Larry Hubich, Hubich, and I'm an appointed senator on the University of Saskatchewan Senate representing the Federation of Labour. So I'm in my second term of the two-term appointments to the Senate, and I'm in my second term right now.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about this petition. What are your thoughts on the issue in general, and is the petition needed, and why?
Yeah, well, the petition is generated by a group of concerned individuals, some attached to the university through the faculty associations, and through the faculty as well as students and others, concerned citizens in the city of Saskatoon and the province. I'm concerned as a senator about some of the redactions that we're seeing and the cloak of secrecy that we're seeing around particularly corporate sponsorships at our universities, both here and in Regina, and I don't sit on the Regina Senate. But there's currently a case going on in Regina around a professor at the University of Regina who requested a Freedom of Information request around some research that she was doing at the university, and the university denied that. And then she took it to the Freedom of Information Commissioner, and they were provided with the information, and most of it was redacted. And the commissioner has suggested that that was inappropriate, so she's taken the university to court. And the university...
The commissioner has? Oh no, the professor.
No, yeah, Ethan.
Yeah.
Come on, Emily Ethan.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd have to get the detail on that case from her. And the university there has actually gone to court and has requested the court to hold the court case in secrecy and no disclosure. And so I'm concerned as a senator that these public institutions who are now heavily relying on corporate sponsorships because of the cutbacks in finance and funding from the provincial government are now getting into these agreements where the conditions of the agreements to get the funding results in this cloak of secrecy. And I think it's the responsibility of the Senate and other governing bodies at the university here and as well in Regina to actually get to the bottom of these situations. And I think that we're entitled to disclosure, we're entitled to strong and conflict of interest guidelines around those kinds of situations, and so I'm interested in seeing what we can do to shed a light on a number of these very serious concerns.
Do you have power to say, like as a senator, I'm sorry I don't know the system super well, like do you have the power to vote on that then, or like for that information to be released? Like how are you able to sort of?
Well, there would be. I mean, we can bring a motion. The Senate senators can bring a motion under the rules.
Would you do that?
It's under active consideration. Obviously, it would be much preferred if we were simply provided with the information, and if the appeals that you're hearing from concerned individuals were respected. But there's been some undercurrent of conversations around, and not all the senators obviously are in support of that. Some are apprehensive, I assume. But there are significant concerns raised by a number of senators around how we can get this information and how we can uncloak the secrecy at the university that we're charged with the responsibility of sitting on the Senate.
So are you sort of waiting for something before you get to the point of perhaps putting forward a motion on that?
Well, we've been working at it, right? We've been working at it. We've been following the processes.
Like when you say we, do you mean just certain members of the Senate?
Just certain members of the Senate, yeah. And there's been the odd meeting to talk about how we, in a respectful way, following the processes, get to the bottom of some of these very thorny questions. And so I'm happy to see the group here today presenting their petition. I'm pleased that the Chancellor took the petition and responded to them, and I guess we'll see where we go from here.
And like, how do you get to the bottom of it? Like, what are you sort of doing there? How are you working on it?
Well, I think that we just keep plugging away at it and keep shedding light on the fact that these public institutions, it appears, because of their need to seek outside funding, particularly from the corporate sector, have engaged in some agreements that I don't think are appropriate. And it begs the question about the trust that we have in our public institutions, it raises an enormous apprehension of bias. If there's research and there's questions about whether or not the research is sound because it's being funded by a corporation, and all of those kinds of things. And then when profs who have some legitimate right to do research are being blocked by their own institution under the guise that this is confidential, that is a serious problem. It leads people to be suspicious, and that's not what we should have in our public education institutions. They should be open, they should be transparent, and they should encourage dialogue and debate and discussion on both sides of the issue. And at this point, I think we need to do some work to get a good, strong dialogue on both sides of this issue.
I guess just to be even more specific,
okay.
Like when you say plugging away at it and you say you need to do some work, like specifically what do you mean? Are you talking about like this conversation and getting, like making it known that this is, your feeling, or are you talking about like actual processes in terms of applications or, court processes? Like what are you able to do?
Well, we're not contemplating court processes at this point, but we're critically aware of what's going on in Regina. We do know what's happening there. We don't think that it's a mere coincidence, that we've got the same kind of approach to disclosure at this university as we do, as it appears to be in the university in Regina. And I guess that we want to follow the processes that are in place for us to have this information provided to the citizens. They are.
So where are you at in terms of what you know those processes?
Well, there's some discussion currently around some look at the conflict of interest policies. So there's an open discussion about the conflict of interest policies here to ensure that they're robust, and that would, I think, depending on the mandate, go some way to resolving some of these issues. Although I can't, presuppose what the outcome of that may be, or where that ends up. But there's those kind of conversations going on, and then there's others who are considering other alternatives. Well, there's a group. I can't put a firm number on it because people come into the conversation and leave, and so. But there has been a number of people involved in the conversation, and there's 1,800 signatures on the petition. So many of those people are engaged.
Okay, that's all my questions.